In 2017's Super Mario Odyssey, there were many new enemies introduced for the games for us to both fight against and capture. And along with these new enemies, there were also many returning from past installments in the series. However, there were many popular enemies from the past that were notably absent from Super Mario Odyssey, and I'm going to be focusing on some of those within this video. Today we're going to be taking a look at 10 popular enemies who were rejected from Super Mario Odyssey. We're going to be looking at how these enemies could have potentially worked in the game, and potentially why they were absent. And one of the main reasons that I decided to go over this in a video today is because one of the main proponents of an argument supporting Super Mario Odyssey 2 is that there were many enemies potentially held off for that game. So by looking at some popular enemies that were not included in Mario Odyssey, we could potentially be getting a preview of what to expect from a potential Odyssey sequel. And with all that being said, let's get started. The first enemy that I wanted to talk about today is the Spike. Now, Spike has been included in many Mario titles over the years, leading to many different variations of the enemy being introduced. They all throw different things, but that's mainly their purpose: to hurl various objects at Mario and friends to attempt to damage them. And I just think the Spike would have worked perfectly in Super Mario Odyssey had it been included. Whatever variation you pick, be it the default, the Stone Spike, or even the Snow Spike that was only included in Mario DS, they could have all worked well with Cappy's capture ability. By allowing Mario to take control of the Spike, you would allow us to throw different objects in various directions, and that could potentially take out certain blocks, for example, to clear a path. Or these big objects could potentially take out many other smaller enemies like Goombas, for example, allowing it to clear the way for an easier travel throughout the level. I just think there were so many different possibilities for the Spike that it was weird that it was passed up upon for the game. One of the only possible reasons I could see the Spike being passed on is for it being potentially saved for a Super Mario Odyssey 2. Because there's nothing really included in Mario Odyssey that somewhat replaces the Spike. There were some classic enemies from the past that weren't included in Mario Odyssey that I'll go over in this video that were potentially replaced by new similar versions of the enemy. But for the Spike, I can't really see that being the case. The next enemy that I want to talk about is one of these cases, being the Whomp, and I'll even throw the Thwomp in here as well because it's a little more popular. These guys have been around for a long time and have also been included in many 3D Mario titles, with the Whomps taking a prominent role in Mario 64, with there being an entire course based around them. The Thwomps, on the other hand, I think are a little more understandably absent from Super Mario Odyssey. I can't really see Cappy doing too much unique in terms of capturing it, and it would probably just allow you to fall down and break bricks. The Whomp, on the other hand, I think would be a great capture and a great enemy to face. Having it fall down and you ground pounding on its back to defeat it is just a great concept, especially in 3D. It doesn't work too well in the 2D titles where it's in a couple of them, but in the 3D games, which it's really made for, the Whomps work pretty well. Now, there is a similar enemy to the Whomp included in Super Mario Odyssey, being the Stairface Ogre. It's similar, but not exactly the same. So you could argue that the Whomp has somewhat been replaced by this enemy from Mario Odyssey, but that doesn't mean that we won't see the Whomp in a potential Odyssey sequel in the future, or even the Thwomp for that matter, even though I don't think it'll work as well. I just really enjoyed seeing these enemies, specifically the Whomp in 3D Mario titles in the past, and I think it would be a great idea to include them in a future Odyssey sequel. Another pair of enemies that I'd like to talk about next includes the Monty Mole and the Rocky Wrench. Both enemies that are very popular because they've appeared in many Mario titles in the past, and I'll go over each of them individually, even though they're only going to take one entry on this list. The Monty Mole, I think, fits better in the plains type levels, your default kingdoms. They could come out of hills and whatnot, and they fit pretty good in there. I could even see them working decently well in the Sand Kingdom. They run around, and I think it'd be an interesting capture for Mario, as it'll just probably allow him to run really fast. It's not the most unique ability in the world, but I think it is something that could have potentially been included and capitalized upon because of how popular the Monty Mole is. The Rocky Wrench, I think, would have been a little bit more difficult to implement, considering that they're mainly placed in airship levels in Mario games. But in the Bowser Kingdom, for instance, I definitely think there could have been a place for them. It just seems like somewhere that they could have fit, and if Mario would have taken control of them, maybe you're allowed to throw wrenches in the air and hit some purple coins or something like that. Allow you to be able to get some object that you wouldn't normally be able to get as Mario through the use of throwing the wrench. Or maybe they could allow you to pop out of the hole and throw wrenches at different enemies, which would be something very unique that we haven't seen too often before. This duo of enemies is just very popular, and this is just going to be the argument for many of the enemies on this list. I don't understand why a lot of these icons from the past weren't included, when there weren't many replacements for them in the games. Sure, there are other enemies that you could throw things with, like the Hammer Bro for instance, that sort of take the ability of the Rocky Wrench, but aesthetically they're very different. And the speediness of the Monty Mole could definitely be capitalized upon if they used it correctly. These are two enemies that I would really like to see in a potential Odyssey sequel. The next enemy that was rejected from Super Mario Odyssey was the Pokey. This enemy just seems like it would scream to be in Super Mario Odyssey's Sand Kingdom. I mean, just look at it, it's made for the desert. The Pokeys have been in 3D Mario games before, and they're very popular in the 2D titles as well. And I just think the capture ability would work so well with it. Allowing you to capture one of the balls and roll around with it and potentially take out enemies by rolling around would be a very unique concept. Or if they implemented the capture mechanic differently and it allowed you to take control of the entire Pokey, allowing you to move around slowly and potentially fire the balls of the Pokey at enemies, for example, that could be kind of interesting as well. Like if there is a 5-ball stack on the Pokey, you could fire the bottom one at an enemy, and then you'll go down to 4, so you'll continue to shrink until you run out. Those are just a couple of examples of how the Pokey could have been implemented in Mario Odyssey. I think there's many possibilities for it, and it's not really replaced by any new enemy in the game, so I can't think of much of a reason for why it was held off, unless it's being included in a sequel. But that begs the question, in a potential Mario Odyssey 2, would there be another Sand Kingdom in the game? Because if there's not, then I think they totally passed up on a very good opportunity to include the Pokey in a prominent role here. I get you want to shed more focus on the new enemies like the Moais, for example, which should always be the focus. I prefer highlighting the new than the old, but Pokeys could have worked very well in this new environment, especially with the capture ability. And in my opinion, it's a very big missed opportunity to have it be absent from the game. The next enemy that I want to talk about, I think is decently popular, but it is probably the least popular enemy on this list, mostly because it's relatively new. This is the Ant Trooper. This enemy was introduced in Super Mario 3D World, and if you don't know it by its name, you'll certainly know it by its appearance. They can't be killed by a normal hit, and they climb upon walls, something pretty unique for Mario enemies, although there is a pair of Mario enemies that I'm going to be talking about later on in the list that does the similar thing. The Ant Troopers have gone on to appear in Captain Toad, they're background characters in Mario Tennis Aces, they're in Mario & Luigi Paper Jam, they're even in Mario Maker 2. These guys have been everywhere since their debut, and it's because of that I'm really surprised why they weren't included in Super Mario Odyssey. This newfounded push from Nintendo creating somewhat of a popularity for this enemy surely would mean that it would be included in Mario Odyssey somewhere, probably in the tropical themed kingdom. But it wasn't. Maybe Nintendo just didn't think the ability of this enemy was unique enough to be included in a Mario game that's all about the uniqueness, but I doubt that that's entirely the case. This could potentially be held over for a Mario Odyssey 2. It's really suspicious to me how this is one of the only Mario games that this enemy hasn't been included in since its debut. The design of the Ant Trooper just sticks out. It's a Mario enemy through and through in its design, but it's very unique from many of the others. And this uniqueness of the Ant Trooper aesthetically, while still maintaining true to the Mario enemy theme, is something that I find very important for it, and why I believe it should continue to be included in new Mario games. The next enemy I want to talk about is the Magikoopa. This character sometimes appears as Kamek and a boss in Mario games, but a lot of the times, like in Galaxy for instance, Magikoopas appear as generic enemies in the game. And this is why I'm kind of wondering why they weren't included in Super Mario Odyssey. They could have worked very well in the Bowser Kingdom, disappearing, reappearing, and firing shots at Mario, and man, when you capture them, that would be a thing of beauty. Being able to turn invisible, walk around, and then reappear to attack an enemy when they become unaware of where you are, it would be just an amazing ability to have. And the shots fired would do some damage to an enemy. Potentially if an enemy has multiple hits to be taken out, it'll do one, for example, not to be too overpowered. I don't know if they'd really want to carry over the ability of changing a generic block to an enemy or another object. I think that would be a little too broken. And maybe that's one aspect of the Magikoopa that kept it from being included in Super Mario Odyssey. Maybe that mechanic is something that they didn't want to take out of the Magikoopa, but at the same time, if you were going to capture it, you would kind of have to have that mechanic in there, or else it would feel a little underwhelming. Either way, I'd really like to see this included in an Odyssey sequel in the future. I just think it would be so fun to disappear and reappear as a Magikoopa. The next popular enemy that was rejected from Mario Odyssey is the Bob-omb. This is one of the big ones. This enemy is seen everywhere in the Mario games, especially in the 3D titles, where it has a very prominent role in Mario 64, being the most famous Mario stage ever next to the Mushroom Kingdom. being Bob-omb Battlefield. There is an enemy that is somewhat similar in concept to the Bob-omb that was introduced for Super Mario Odyssey, this being the Trap Beetle, and they're seen pretty frequently in the Tropical Kingdom. You basically capture this enemy and they'll explode eventually, which is something that the Bob-omb would probably do if it was captured. If there were to be a Super Mario Odyssey 2, for instance, and there was an industrial themed kingdom and everything's all metal and all that, then I think the Bob-omb would probably work a little bit better there, whereas the Trap Beetle works more well in the tropical themed kingdom. That would probably be where the Bob-omb would make its debut in the Odyssey format. It's just so popular and so common throughout the Mario games that I found it very weird that they made it absent from Odyssey. Unless they're planning something for it in a future Odyssey sequel, which would kind of make sense, then I don't really understand why it was absent. It could have been included in other kingdoms, like the Bowser Kingdom for instance, where the Trap Beetle might not have worked as well. The next enemy, or duo of enemies I should say, is the Buzzy Beetle and Spike Top. These enemies have been around in the Mario series forever, and they're extremely common, making them some enemies that people don't really like to deal with that much. Buzzy Beetles to a lesser extent, because at least you could jump on them and throw the shell around, whereas the Spike Top is an enemy that you can't really jump on unless you want to get damaged. These enemies would be similar to the Ant Trooper, where if you were to capture them, you'd be able to climb on walls, which would be kind of interesting. They're not as aesthetically unique as the Ant Trooper, which is why I would think that would probably work a little bit better to be included in Odyssey 2, because it would fit the theme more. But these guys are a lot more popular than the Ant Trooper is, so take your pick. The Buzzy Beetles even became more prominent through the release of Super Mario Maker, where you got the helmets created from them, and the Spike Tops would just have to be included if the Buzzy Beetle was, because it's a nice variant to have. One has a spike and one doesn't. You could jump on one but not jump on the other. There could be many unique uses for these two in the games, even though their concept for capture is pretty simple. And that's why I'd really like to see them in a potential Odyssey sequel. The next enemy that I want to talk about today is the Blooper. This would be a great enemy to include in the underwater segments of Super Mario Odyssey, be it in the seaside or lake kingdom, which I think would be a little bit more preferred in my part. The Blooper would be fantastic to have. We do have the Gushins in Super Mario Odyssey, which are incredible enemies that allow you to launch and go in the air, but I think that's a lot different from what the Blooper would potentially be. What I would see the Blooper being as a capture in Super Mario Odyssey is you go underwater, capture it, and then you'd be able to spray ink everywhere, distracting the enemies and allowing you to travel throughout the level with them not seeing you, for example. You'd be able to see your way obviously through the ink, but the enemies would be sprayed with it, kind of like in Mario Kart, where if you use the Blooper item, other people's screens get messed up, whereas yours is squeaky clean. It'd be a nice way to get the cheaps away from you when you don't want to deal with them. A reason for why the Blooper was potentially not included is this, that it may conflict with the other water enemies included in the games, and Nintendo wouldn't want to take away from the new additions they created, like the aforementioned Gushin, or the inclusion of the Cheeps and the Mawrays and things like that. If you get a future sequel to Odyssey, the Blooper would be a great enemy to see. And the final enemy, this one is probably the one that people are most shocked about not being included in Super Mario Odyssey. This is the Boo. Come on, man, out of all enemies to not include, one of the coolest enemies in the entire Mario series was not included in Mario Odyssey. I just couldn't believe it. Boos obviously sneak up on Mario when he's not looking at, making it a great enemy concept, and it could also be an interesting capture where now you could be the one sneaking up on other enemies from behind and taking them out, doing damage to them, sneaking up just like a Boo would do to you. But this never happened in Super Mario Odyssey. So why was the Boo rejected? My personal theory is that the residents of Bonneton are kind of spooky and ghost-like, and maybe Nintendo didn't want to have both the Boos and these characters both included in the game, which is why the Boos had to be scrapped in favor of unique Bonneton residents. I already mentioned in this video that I prefer the new to the old just to create some more unique experiences for the player, but the Bonneton residents don't really do anything in the game, meaning that I'd probably prefer the Boo to these guys, to be honest. There's no outright spooky themed kingdom in the game other than probably Bonneton, which isn't really that spooky to begin with, so if we got an Odyssey sequel, the Boo would definitely feature a major role in the spooky themed kingdom. A lot of these enemies are so unique in concept and have been well established throughout the history of the Mario series that it just baffles me that they weren't included in Super Mario Odyssey. I think that there are many reasons supporting an Odyssey 2, such as sales of the original being great, for instance, the lack of new kingdoms as DLC, some of the content that seems to have been cut like Isle Delfino, for instance. That all points to a potential Odyssey sequel. But another point strongly in favor of that are these 10 examples of enemies that were not included in the original Odyssey that I think could all work pretty well in an Odyssey sequel. Yeah, they were all cut for one reason or another, potentially by having a replacement or simply not being required to be in the game, but they could all have their uses. And while we got new enemies introduced for the original Super Mario Odyssey, we could get more introduced for an Odyssey sequel and take out some of the enemies that were from the first game in favor of including these, just to provide more capture variety for the new game, which I think is something that everybody wants. You don't want to have the exact same captures as the first Mario Odyssey, you want something a little bit different. So you bring in some of the old that wasn't in the first one, and then you get to capture some of your favorite enemies from the past, like the Boo, Bob-omb, Whomp, and many more that have gone over in this video, and that creates a brand new experience and a better game in general. Let me know what enemies you were surprised weren't included in Mario Odyssey in the comment section down below. Remember to subscribe and tick the bell icon if you want to see more Mario content and other things Nintendo when they release on the channel. Check out some previous videos that I have linked for you on the screen right now, and thank you so much for watching.